All right, everyone. We are live on Facebook, and today we are going to talk about how Mark and I work together in our home-based business or predominantly online business. He joined my business about 1 year ago, but before I get into all of the details of that, I'll go ahead and ask him to maybe unmute himself, say hello, and then I'll start the
Hello.
slide share. And probably everyone has spotted Zelda already. She's even purring into the microphone because I didn't spend any time with her this afternoon. She is extra anxious to have my attention. So enjoy that. here, here we go. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Does that look okay on your end, Mark?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. So before I get into how things work today, I think it's useful to know that as far as the relationship between me and Mark, we have known each other quite a long time. So we started out as coworkers at a publishing company, F&W Media, which no longer exists, sadly. I started at the company in 1998. It was my first job out of college. And Mark joined just a couple years later, 2000. It was not his first job out of college, but it was your first publishing job. And so we worked in different divisions, and we did interact on occasion, and in fact, more frequently as time went on. We ended up working more and more together. Although I was not his boss, he was not my boss. We were colleagues in separate departments. So in those roles in publishing, I was in editorial roles. So my job was to acquire books, to write articles, and to do all of the things that you would expect an editor to do. And by the time I left F&W Media, I was publisher of Writer's Digest, and so I was getting into the business side of things, into business strategy. When I left that position, I ended up teaching at university levels. So then I started to develop my teaching skills. I got into website development for my own business, as well as for the Virginia Quarterly Review, where I went to work. And all of this involved a great deal of marketing. So those are my strengths and past roles. Meanwhile, Mark, when he was at F&W, he worked in the production department, and I'll let him explain to you what that means. But in brief, a lot of it had to do with what I consider to be quality control, back of house support. So he was working in support of other departments like editorial. He had to communicate with vendors like printers. And also just he happens to have some audio visual editing skills. Part of that is a little bit to do with his work in production, but he also has musical interests on the side, which play into that. So, Mark, is there anything in particular you want to say about the roles you had at F&W?
The book production department, which is where I was, we also published magazines, but I never actually touched the production of magazines. To this day, I really don't know anything about how they're made. But in the book production department, we were the liaisons uh, between the creative end of publishing and the manufacturing, practical end, if you will. So our job was dealing with the printers, making sure that everything was going to print okay, which meant that we had to get our fingers into the creative process as well, and troubleshoot everything along the line editorially, in terms of design, the building of the actual files that were used for printing. And we also had to deal with really every department, accounting as well. Just we interacted with a lot of different facets of the publishing business, which I thought really benefited my understanding, because a lot of departments can tend to be kind of siloed in their tasks and in how much they're really exposed to the broader knowledge of the other facets of the business. It can be very easy for someone in a certain role to think that they're kind of the heart of the business and think that what they do is the most important without necessarily understanding what the other departments do. So yeah, I thought I got a really good education in the production department in terms of how I got to interact with and understand a lot of different facets of the business.
The story I like to tell, and this will kind of lead us into the strengths slide here, is that when our first interaction, as I remember it, I was an editor, an assistant editor working on a book. I think it was something like Quaint Birdhouses You Can Paint and Decorate. So it was like a step-by-step book with photography and a lot of details involved in that, like, measurements and supply lists and things of that nature. And I think it was the first book maybe I had sent to production. I don't know. All I can recall is you coming to my cubicle with all of the page proofs, with post-it notes all over it, pointing out all the things I had gotten wrong. So it made such an impression on me, um, realizing that actually I wasn't all that good at detail work as far as being an editor. I mean, I think I can say that I got the content right. But as far as making sure all of the details were right, I pretty much failed on some level with that. Although certainly just not to cast aspersions on my employer for hiring me, but we had copy editors who went through all of that stuff, and we had proofreaders, and then of course we had production editors like Mark to catch those errors that had slipped past everybody. So in any event, just to say that my strengths, when I entered that job and then throughout my career, I've always been more big picture, making content decisions, making decisions, period, and trying to be as efficient as possible. So I'm very much about action. Um, Sometimes to a fault. I don't always think things through as much as I ought to. And so I think that brings us to you, Mark, where you care very much about getting the details right.
Yes, that's right. It's probably a good thing that I didn't end up in an editorial position at F&W, which I had considered at least one point. But I think the simple fact is I probably didn't necessarily have that much interest or vision when it came to all of the different types of content that we published, because obviously we did writing instruction, which is what most of our audience knows you for, and fine art and crafts and woodworking and you name it. There's a lot of different things that we published, and I was certainly not a master of any of those fields. And I guess what I liked about production was I wasn't married to any one of those specific content fields. I kind of got to see it all, and I wasn't responsible for the vision of what are we going to publish. I was more in the realm of how are we going to get that published? What are the hurdles? What is it going to cost? Um, I guess you could call me a bureaucrat, but I like to think that I wasn't there to prevent anything from happening. I was just there to make sure that you understood the consequences of the decisions that you were making for a publishing project.
Yeah, I think one of the uh, common scenarios would be something like an editor wanting to have a black matte cover finish or something really impractical like that. And then you would come in and say, well, if you have a black matte cover finish, it's going to scuff and look terrible by the time it gets on display in a bookstore.
Yeah, we did a lot of that. Yeah, if this, then that.
Yeah.
If this is what you're after, be aware that here's the flip side
Yeah.
of that in practical terms.
And then you also managed the company-wide master schedule, which was kind of this massive Excel file with all of the details about every single book that was going to the printer and all of the dates that had to be met. And so you were something of, trying to ensure that the trains ran on schedule and holding people to account. Which also came into play in our interactions where I was pleading for more time for editors to do XYZ. And you were saying, well, no, this is the date we agreed on and you have to meet it.
I think you've probably just highlighted an unfortunate aspect of my personality that was very well suited to production.
Yes.
I like holding people to account. But
Um,
yeah, so the master schedule, I shouldn't say it was the engine that everything ran on. It was uh, a database of sorts in an Excel spreadsheet, which isn't a great idea, of all of the dates, all of the specifications of the entire publishing program. And yes, it's a detail thing. And that's me. I'm a detail person. I don't really know, like the entire time that I was there, nearly 20 years, I didn't know much about the like the bent of the publishing program. I probably didn't really care. I was interested in the details. That's just my natural
yeah,
inclination. So I think I ended up in the right place.
yeah, agreed. So that this brings me to one way I like to think about our differences, um, which is if you presented me and Mark with a new something like a new like we got a new blender a couple months ago, and my first impulse was to unbox it, plug it in, and try it out without reading the instruction manual, which quickly led to failure, in fact. So the first thing that Mark did was even before he saw my failure, he was like, "Did you read the instruction guidelines?" He pulled out the book and he read the instructions, and then, of course, successfully blended a smoothie following those instructions. Whereas I thought, well, this can't be so hard to figure out. Surely I can intuitively uh, discern what needs to be done, and I didn't. Sometimes my process works, and sometimes it doesn't. But I don't have the patience, in other words, to read the instructions. And in fact, I'm more likely to just break the rules anyway. Do you have anything to add?
I don't have anything to add.
So this leads us into our business today. So unfortunately, when F&W Media, this was in 2019, and they declared bankruptcy. It was a very sad ending for the company because I got split up into pieces. And because Mark was in a support role in production, uh, that department essentially went away and he was laid off in June 2019. Yes, that's right. I'm getting the dates right. June
Yes.
2019. So that's, basically your last day was a Friday, and then your first day with me was a Monday. And we had some, like, we had a little bit of, obviously, when a company declares bankruptcy, there's a period of tying up loose ends. So we knew it was coming. We had a few months to prepare. So what I decided to hand over to Mark with my business, which, I had been running by myself for 5 years at that point. I was doing all the customer service. So, like, when people would email and say, I'm trying to find X, or I can't get the recording for Y, or I need a refund, or I didn't get the information to log in, like all of that stuff, all that day to day stuff, I handed over to him. For any sort of new blog posts at my site, he now loads those up, and that's using the WordPress system. I have a range of newsletters that I send out, and they all have templates that have to be updated in MailChimp. So he does that. He updates things like the classes list at the website, the speaking and the events at the website, and in the newsletters too. My paid newsletter, the hot sheet, I used to load all of that myself. He now does all of the loading for that before it goes out and does a final proof, and in addition to the customer service. Some of you have taken my webinars, the paid webinars, where afterward we deliver the recording. So Mark takes care of all of that post-production in addition to the customer service. So, like, the video editing, getting it up on the site, communicating with all the students to ensure that they have the information they need to access the recording. It's a full 2 days of work, if not 3 days. And then you do all of the accounting now. So, like, the month-end reconciliation and making sure all the books are accurate. And then also ironing, since 2012, that predates predates you joining the business. But you take care of a lot of important home functions that I totally overlook, which is appreciated. Um, I don't know, of these tasks, do you want to comment on any that you found maybe the most difficult as part of the transition to take on?
I don't know that any one of them was the most difficult. It's just an awful lot of moving pieces. I continue to be impressed by how much you were doing on your own before I joined the business. Now, granted, I'm seeing a different side of the business because just having me on board has allowed you to expand the products that you offer or scale up certain products that you already offered. And with that scale comes, more customer service, for example, more accounting, perhaps. Um, so I'm seeing a different scale of it, but still, there are so many different things that you're just holding in your head that are just the results of hard-won experience doing
Yeah.
this for a long time. Um, so yeah, it's been an awful lot to learn, and I'm still learning all the time. I've always believed that it takes you about a year on the job to really feel like you know what you're doing. Not that you're an expert, but that you kind of know what you're doing. You've settled in, and that's really what it took here, about a year. And I'm still making mistakes, and I'm still learning. Um, and I think, yeah, what I've definitely learned is that I'm capable of being, those of you who recognize that, the Hand of the Queen pin from Game of Thrones. I'm the hand of the queen. I'm not an extension of the brain of the queen or the vision of the queen. Uh, Jane is still very much 100% responsible for where she wants the business to go and what is the best use of her time. And my role is to execute those directives to the best of my abilities.
I think one of the harder parts for me with the transition was that so much of what I did, since it was just myself, I hadn't put down in writing what the steps were, how I did things, why I did them a certain way. As you said, it was like all in my head and I just kept track of it. And so it's not like I could have handed you a training manual, but it did create that some patient. I had to be more patient than I think I ultimately was at like explaining, okay, here are the steps, or let's sit down and sketch out what the steps are so that you know. Um, so yeah, that was pretty interesting for me. Um, so as Mark indicated, the stuff that I'm probably always going to handle are decisions about the content, contributors, guest instructors, anything related to content strategy. Um, I think whenever we do something new, like when we launched the online webinar series that we've been doing, uh, you know, I decided what service we were going to use, which was Zoom webinars. What those of you who are in the webinar today, you see this. This is what I chose, um, and I created the initial template for it, and the structure and the process, and then Mark executes and carries it out. So anytime there's a decision about what sort of service or platform or technology to use, I'm making those decisions. And then I still take care of anything that's really what I would consider central website development, like the WordPress site development, creating new sites when it's needed, or creating new things from scratch. So there some of the things I listed that Mark does are fairly independent. So like webinar post-production, I mean, you pretty much do that yourself. You don't really need me to intervene or give you any direction. It's pretty straightforward. But there are lots of things, especially customer facing on the customer facing end, where we have to have pretty good communication and collaborate. So especially with email, because there's so many different email addresses that are part of the business, we've had to come up with a system of letting each other know who's going to respond to the email, if it requires me to respond, if you've taken care of it. And we still occasionally step on each other's toes here where I get like overly um, uh, involved in what's happening in some of the customer support email accounts, and I start responding to things that really you're already taking care of. But in any event, for those who are curious, we use a email software called Postbox, and that which loads up all of the email accounts related to the business, and we're both looking at the same email accounts, and we can see when something's been read or not read, and then we can flag things. So if Mark puts a flag on a message, I know that he wants me to take a look at it and respond. And then obviously we're sitting in the same place almost. We're like down the hall from one another. We don't share an office, but we're very close to one another. So we can just step into one another's office or message one another um, if we feel like a message needs immediate attention. Anything you want to mention about email, Mark?
Nope.
Okay. With that email comes, things that it saves me a lot of time if he's able to respond as if he were me, basically. And sometimes he will sign emails as if they're from me. Things that are kind of like there are form responses, ready to go responses. I get a lot of requests for can you recommend an editor? Can you recommend a company who does X? Can you recommend a, a, a literary lawyer? Those sorts of things. And so I've, as much as possible, I've tried to create resources or ready to go responses that he can just use without having to consult me. We both use Notion, and that's because Notion has some collaborative features that allow us, again, to look at exactly the same set of notes. So we have a collaborative workspace, and we also have our own private workspaces. So whenever we're working on something that we need to share, we just move it to the collaborative notebooks. If it's something that doesn't relate to the other person, we keep it private. And we each have our own respective to-do lists. And so he can get into my to-do list and add things. I can get into his to-do list and add things, which is, it's nice to avoid interrupting each other. If it's not something that's urgent, we can just go into Notion and make those additions. We also use Notion for frequently needed information, things that we both need to reference, like the upcoming webinar schedule, what's on the advertising schedule for the newsletter, conferences that we're attending, links to past hot sheet issues. They're just, when you run a business, they're just consistent lists of things that you need to have access to. And so we maintain those things together. Anything you want to mention, Mark, about Notion?
Nope.
Okay. We also have templates that are stored on accounts that, especially for classes, we're replicating the same model again and again. So we have, what I typically do is I'll set up the initial template for a marketing effort, and then Mark can replicate it or fill in the design pieces and check with me to make sure that it looks all right. So again, just trying to set things up so that he can do as much as possible for the tasks that repeat. And then I can just say, yes, that looks good, let's move ahead. Or I can get in there and make changes myself.
When it comes to that, that's definitely an area where I really rely on your judgment and vision in terms of branding, because you know what works for your audience, you know what sets the correct tone for a piece of content, whereas that's not second nature to me. And it's your name on the business, and I very much hesitate to impose my own creative inclinations on that sort of stuff, because the tone that I might choose to express myself isn't the sort of tone that you would use to express yourself. So yeah, that's an area where I really rely on you again to make those creative decisions, and then I'm sort of an administrative assistant, like you said, making the different iterations or carrying out the will.
Right. Um, I think it was interesting when you first started doing, well, even now to some extent, when you try to pick the first, do a first pass of images that could be used for blog posts. These would be for guest contributors. And I noticed early on there was a pattern of you choosing things that tended to be black and white or otherwise like, or sepia
Sepia
tones.
tone,
like,
antique looking.
yeah,
Yeah.
like we need color. Uh, and I think once I brought it to your attention, you were, well, you were more, tried to be a little bit more diverse with your selections. Um,
But again, you are a more savvy user of social media, especially for marketing, than I am. I've never really used social media for marketing, so I don't understand as well as you do what works in that medium, what really catches somebody's eye and makes them want to delve further. So yeah, nowadays I still try to come up with some images, or I'll pull a dozen images that I think maybe could work for the blog post and run them past you, and then you probably reject most of them and go find something better within a matter of seconds.
um, well, I don't know if that's quite true, and you're probably not giving yourself enough credit. You hit on some great images, like the most recent guest post image was, or it's actually coming up on Monday. So for those of you paying attention, look for the Monday guest post. The image was selected by Mark. I think it's perfect. The leaf with the E on it was really, really good. Um, but I mean, I can agree with you to an extent in that maybe you don't have the same aesthetic that I do, or the aesthetic I think that's right for my audience. But you have a very strong um, and I think impressive aesthetic that you put on your own stuff. Like on you have a music mix called Gray Days and Gold, and I think it's pretty impressive visually what you come up with every month. So for those who are curious, you can find it at markfgriffin.com, and maybe we'll go visit that site before the end of our session. Okay, and then just a little techie bit. We use LastPass. This is lastpass.com to store and save passwords and share access with one another. So because there's so many accounts that we both need access to, and we don't want to have to be scratching down passwords or messaging back and forth about the password. So we use LastPass to share those with each other and keep it all secure. And then, Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the solo projects that you've done where I'm basically at this point not involved any longer. So I'll let you take it.
Sure, we've done a couple of book design projects. That's not something that I really had much experience with, even despite having been in publishing for 20 years, because I was just working in a different realm of publishing. Um, but we've done a couple of projects of midwifing someone's book to bring it into the world. So that included designing the interior of the book and um, working with the cover designer and doing all of the production stuff that I used to do, like figuring out what are the dimensions of the cover going to be, what's the spine width going to be on the KDP version versus the Ingram Spark version, and just working out those nitpicky things. And again, that's a perfect example of when it came to the design for one of those books, the first one that we did, Jane actually set up the the initial interior design concept. And then I took that and ran with it. But if it had been left to me to come up with, well, how many lines are going to be on the page and what kind of typeface should we use, etc., I would have been paralyzed by my own inexperience and by the myriad choices. Whereas Jane had the experience to know, okay, here's what's going to work. Here's what the general standards are. Uh, and then the photo with Keezer Khan that you see there, he made his way to us via conduct at the Virginia Festival of the Book. He was looking to produce his own pocket constitution. Just for his own speaking appearances, he attends a lot of naturalization ceremonies, etc. And he was looking for somebody to help him bring this thing into the world. And so I did, I'd say, the bulk of the work on that one. I see people appreciating the covers. Thank you so much. I didn't do any of those covers. Those are all done by professional cover designers. Um, but I did all of the other invisible stuff on those. So yeah, we don't do much of that work. It's time consuming, and it's not necessarily that lucrative. Especially with the Keyser Khan job, because we actually donated our efforts to that one because it just seemed like it was our civic duty.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just mention one interesting challenge we had with this was The Papaya King by Adam Pelsman. Um, we had an issue with the cover reproducing properly in digital format, which was really such a production oriented issue. And I can't even remember now what the ultimate solution was.
The images weren't rasterized. We had to
Oh,
rasterize the whole cover.
okay. Yeah. So I remember that. Like it was kind of traumatic the way that it played out. And that's what I'm always going to remember is those white roses or flowers looking too brown um, and trying feverishly to fix it. Um,
So those projects were a great learning experience for me because uh, the two books that you see on the right hand side of the slide by Adam Pelsman, they're self published novels, and I had never had occasion to so much as think about KDP or Ingram Spark. I had a background in working with printers, so I knew uh, I knew the underlying issues around printing. Here's what you need to take into consideration when you're printing a book. But I really didn't know any working with the design files. What kind of PDF do you have to use? Um, the upload and the distribution and the pricing in the multiple markets and all of that stuff. So it's been a really interesting learning experience.
Gives you more sympathy for, I think, the clients we have generally are the people who are looking for help about how confusing it can all be to navigate that all those services.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're into Q&A mode now. We're about 3:30, so we'll stick around for questions. I see there are a couple questions in the Q&A box. I'll pop that open. Let's see what we've got. Brenda asks if all of the sites and programs like LastPass are for Apple users. And LastPass is platform agnostic. So is Canva. And Notion is platform. I think, is Notion, can you use Notion on an Android? I think you can.
I believe so, yes.
I think Notion is platform agnostic as well. The only thing I've mentioned so far that's for Apple users only is I think Postbox. I think Postbox is the Apple based software that if you were a PC user, I'm not. You have actually PC users actually I think have a plethora of options when it comes to managing email. It's the Apple users that I always feel like there's so little out there available. If you wanted something like Postbox, I would look at Thunderbird probably, which is something Mark used to use. Um, so yeah, and then Brenda's also asking if we have pricing for the sort of service that we've provided to Adam Pelsman and to Keyser Khan. And the short answer is no. It's really on a per project basis. So it really depends on the needs of the author, where they're at in the process, how much work is required. And we don't take on that many. I can count on one hand the number we've taken on because we don't, I don't think we're a great fit for most authors tackling that process. But for those who are interested, if Brenda, for example, if you're interested, you're welcome to reach out to us and we can either let you know if we're the right fit. But most of the time, like 95% of the time, I'm referring people to other services that can offer you what I would consider like a more fully supportive sort of self-publishing process.
Yeah, that taking those jobs on was actually an experiment when we knew that my F&W job was going to go away and that I was going to join Jane's business. It opened up the question of, well, what are we going to do to make ends meet? What kind of work am I going to do as part of the business? And so one of our initial experiments was taking on that sort of design and publication work, which, like I said, has been a great learning experience. But I think what we've both learned, just to repeat what I said earlier, is that it is quite time consuming. And in the end, I don't know that it's the best use of our time in terms of the amount of money that we can charge. Something like webinars actually end up being a better use of our time. So, yeah, that was just part of the initial figuring out where the business is going to go, which is a constantly evolving process because you first went full-time freelance in 2015, or was it 2014?
2014.
Um, and it is a constantly evolving process. You're always figuring out um, as as things grow, uh, you're making the determination all along of, do I still want to keep doing this? Is this still a good use of my
Yeah,
time? Or is it preventing me from doing something that I'd rather be doing?
right. Yeah. I think part of the issue too with the self-publishing projects is that I think I have so much more work for you than I anticipated. So, initially I thought, oh, you're going to have, I don't know, 20 hours a week, to maybe spend on solo sorts of projects. And I don't think that's really the case at all. It may never be the case. Um, and part of that's because of the ramp up of online education and the amount of customer service that produces. Um, so yeah, um, I'm going. Uh, I'm going to check to see if there are any questions on the Facebook feed. But before I do that, I'll just mention that the next sermon is going to be Sunday, November 1st. I've had requests to talk a little bit about MailChimp integration with websites and blogs and so on. So for those of you who are MailChimp users, this is the email marketing service. If you're curious about how to use it better, to make sure it's integrated properly, tips on design templates and such, I'll be doing a little informal walkthrough of how I use it. And yeah, so that's November 1. And then, of course, we've been talking about the paid online courses the whole time, and you can find those at my website. So for those of you here in the Zoom session, feel free to pop questions into the Q&A. And I'm going to check, like I said, I'm going to check Facebook, see what's going on over there. And so far, I don't see any questions. So we have been we've been very clear and comprehensive with our discussion of the division of labor. And I'll check the chat. Yes, I think we've covered everything. Any parting words of wisdom?
No, I don't know that I do have any. It's actually a pleasure working for you. It's
I
no,
wasn't fishing
really,
for a compliment.
I understand. But having worked in a corporate environment for 20 years and found myself ambivalent about the decisions being made by the business, and how I'm putting my efforts towards something that I don't necessarily agree with. I'm so happy to be working for you because you make good decisions. You I think you have the best intentions for your audience, and yeah, it's actually a pleasure, um, like I said, executing your vision because you have such a great vision.
Thank you. Uh, as you were talking there, a question did come through from Kathy saying, we hear so much about the challenges of working together for couples, and have there been any snags or challenges? Um, and certainly there was stress and anxiety in the first few months. I mean, I feel like I pretty much dropped you in the deep end. Um, I don't know if there was another way to do it, but kind of, like I I just figured you could dive in without the instruction manual, essentially, and you made the best of it that you could. And there were definitely exasperating moments on both sides, but those have by and large, I think, gone away. I think the main issues currently are when I suspect, sometimes wrongly, that you're burning up hours on something that's unworthy of your time. So to give a really recent example, we just introduced closed captioning for the webinars, which the main purpose of that was to give live attendees who need closed captioning for accessibility reasons, to give them as similar an experience as anyone else attending the webinar. And I think it's been, given the automated nature of it, it's been pretty successful. Um, and then in the post-production for the webinar, those closed captions can be saved and seen with the recording. And because of your detail-oriented nature, you were spending a lot of time trying to line up the closed captions with the actual speech, with the time to get the timing perfect so that there wasn't a time delay. And I remember, let's see, the webinar was on a Saturday. Was it a Saturday? And you were sitting on the couch on was it a Tuesday night? I think it was. It was like 9 p.m. and you were on your laptop. I didn't know you were working. That's usually our downtime, but you were working. And I said, "What are you doing?" And you responded, "I'm trying to get the closed captions to line up." And I was like, "What? What are you doing?" So
I'm a perfectionist, and there's only so much room for perfectionism. So again, that's where I have to take my cues from you, and of course we also offer transcripts,
yeah.
automated transcripts of. So there's already text. So what I was trying to do was something very nitpicky, uh, and ultimately not entirely necessary, but I can't help it.
I mean, it was admirable, what you were trying to do. But yeah, so essentially I gave you permission to not do that. Otherwise, I think you would have continued trying to do it.
Yes.
So there are things like that crop up, and sometimes I have to actively kind of question or have a radar out for when you might be doing that and not telling me. Sometimes you tell me, sometimes you don't. I don't know. So that sometimes makes me overly aggressive when I think you're wasting your time when you're actually not.
And I don't know how well equipped we are to address the question of couples working together, because we actually, I think we do this remarkably well. I don't know if we do it better than anyone else or if our personalities are just suited to it, but we've both been working from home together since 2012, even though between 2012 and 2018, I was working for another company, but we were both in the same space, basically doing our separate jobs. And really, the only thing that changed on June 24th, 2018, was that I was doing a job for you now, still, from my same home office. And I think maybe there's just something in our personalities that makes this work well.
Yeah, well, I also think early on, um, I don't think I could put a year on it, but before we ended up working together, but after we started the romantic relationship, because we didn't start dating until we were 10 years coworkers. So after that dating point, but before we started working together again, um, I think we came to a level of acceptance about the other person's, well, I'll say the flaws that we would identify in the other person. what we might consider flaws or what we consider weaknesses in the other person, we decided that's just the way they are. Maybe they're not actually weaknesses. This is something we're going to accept rather than try and change. And so I think we're fortunate in that for my business, you excel at exactly the aspects I need you to excel at, because I'm just never going to care in the same way you do about the detail work. And it's a relief to have someone take care of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a relief for me to have that detail work to do because that's what I enjoy. Like one of the things that I'm working on in the background right now is um, you've been trying to make the hot sheet newsletter archives available on a permanent basis for people because right now it all only exists in email. And so slowly I'm trying to migrate that over to the website, and ultimately subscribers will have access to the whole archive of back issues, which is just slow work. And some of the businesses that you covered might have gone out of business, or some of the links are no longer active, and so I got to check all the links. And yeah, it's just slow detail work, but I like slow detail work, and it's not a good use of your time to do that, so I'm all too happy to do it if ultimately it ends up rewarding the business, which it will.
Right. Yeah. We had a question that came up in the chat about the transcripts. I thought maybe I would just quickly explain what Mark means by transcripts. So all of the webinars get exported, the audio files get exported into Otter.ai, which is a service that will take an audio file and make a transcript out of it. It's amazingly accurate. I mean, it's not going to be letter perfect, but it does a great job, I think, of capturing um, even a multi-speaker session, and it tries to label the speakers, in fact, accurately.
And I do a great job cleaning it up
You
afterwards too.
do. Yes. So I was about to add that Mark goes through that transcript and makes it much more readable and accurate for the people who are relying on the transcript or using it in a way to, I think it's especially, I'll just insert my opinion about why the transcript is useful. I don't know if you agree with this, Mark, but rather than have to listen to the recording, you can actually just do a keyword search for that time when I discussed X, or if you're looking for really particular information, you can find that really quickly. But I don't, maybe you have different, Mark is now, engaging with customers on that piece more frequently than I am. And so maybe you've heard different ways that people are using the transcripts.
Nope, nobody's ever said a word about them.
Okay.
But I can certainly imagine that, yeah, if you attended the live session and you remembered vaguely that something was mentioned, yeah, exactly right. You can do a quick find in that Word document.
Yeah.
And that'll save you the time of, scrubbing through or listening in real time to the whole thing again, just to find that one bit of information.
Yeah.
Oh, and somebody's asked where are they available? For the attendees of our paid webinars, those transcripts are always available as part of the downloads, the recordings, the Q&As, etc. The transcripts are always there. I'm afraid we don't have any transcripts for these free sessions.
Yeah. Good. So I think that covers off all of the questions. Oh, wait, there are a couple more in the box here. Mary's asking, how do I get such nice sound? We get this question a lot. Mark and I, in fact, use different microphones. I'm using an Audio Technica. I don't remember the model. It's like a 2045 but it's I think the microphone itself costs maybe $150, $200, but it plugs into an audio interface that sits on my desk. So it's not a USB microphone, which is pretty important for those of you who are looking for simplicity, like a plug and play sort of microphone where you just plug it straight into your computer and it works. That's not this microphone. This plugs into an interface, which costs another $100. So I don't know that I recommend it for just general use. I would probably recommend what Mark has, and you can tell them what you've got there.
This is a Blue Yeti USB microphone on a boom stand with a little pop filter in front, which I think you've also got.
I think mine has a built-in pop
Okay.
filter. And the one you've got, what does it retail for? Like $100 or something?
That's probably close, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah. Um, Dane is asking what audio interface brand I use, which is a very informed question. It's a Scarlett Solo interface. It also says Focusrite on the top, and I'm not sure if it's Scarlett is the brand or Focusrite is the brand. Do you know, Mark?
I'm afraid I don't.
Okay. So that uh it's red, if that's helpful. It's bright red. Thus Scarlet, I guess.
Well, I know that I guess the one technical thing that I know is that the microphone that you're using is just a standard XLR
Hmm.
microphone. It's got 3 pins
Hmm.
in the end. So that's really what you need is any sort of audio interface that'll connect that 3 pin circular connection and transform it into a USB connection that plugs into your computer.
Hmm. Hmm. And then here's a question from Marvin. He says he's a big OneNote user. Is that a Microsoft brand? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
So he's a big OneNote user. Do we have anything good or bad to say about it? He uses it to distribute to-do lists and gather research material. I've never used it, so I don't have anything good or bad to say, but I'm all about use the tool that works for you that especially with note taking, I find that the best tool is the one that you can get in the habit of using because that's what makes it so powerful is that you've got everything in one place and you're not searching 3 different locations for the material. So that's if OneNote does that for you, great. Okay. So I think that handles all the questions. Thank you all for joining us. And just as a reminder, the next Sunday sermon will be November 1st, and I will be talking about MailChimp. Or maybe I will see you before then at one of the paid classes where Mark will be attending as well. So thanks again. Have a wonderful Sunday evening. Bye bye.